The stagecoach rattled into Georgetown, Colorado on a bitterly cold February morning in 1878, carrying a woman who hadn't stopped trembling since leaving St. Louis 3 weeks prior, and Zachary Jennings knew the moment he saw her step down onto the frozen mud that his carefully constructed plan to bring a wife west had just become infinitely more complicated than he had anticipated. She stood there in the watery sunlight, a slender figure wrapped in a threadbare coat that did nothing to protect her from the mountain wind, her gloved hands clutching a worn carpet bag, as though it contained everything she owned in the world, which it probably did. Her eyes, wide and dark beneath the brim of a faded bonnet, darted from face to face in the small crowd that had gathered to watch the stage arrive. And when her gaze finally landed on him, the tall cowboy holding his hat respectfully against his chest, he saw something that made his heart clench with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. "Miss Gwendolyn Norton?" he asked, stepping forward carefully, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, the way he might approach a wild horse that had never known a kind hand. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper, trembling like aspen leaves in autumn. "Yes, are you Mr. Jennings?" "I am, madam," he replied softly, noting how she flinched when he took another step closer. "Welcome to Georgetown. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." She didn't answer right away, her fingers tightening on the carpet bag until her knuckles showed white even through the thin fabric of her gloves. When she did speak, the words came out rushed and uncertain. "The journey was long, very long. I did not expect the mountains to be so high." Zachary found himself studying her face more closely now that they stood only a few feet apart. She was younger than he had expected from her letters, perhaps 22 or 23 years old, with delicate features that might have been beautiful if they weren't drawn so tight with anxiety. A fading bruise colored the edge of her jaw, barely visible beneath the careful application of powder, and he felt something dark and protective stir in his chest. "They take some getting used to," he said gently, gesturing toward the peaks that surrounded the mining town on all sides. "But they're beautiful once you learn to appreciate them. Would you like to get out of this cold? I have a wagon waiting and my ranch is about an hour's ride from town." The fear in her eyes intensified and she took an involuntary step backward. "Your ranch? Yes, of course." He noticed the way her breathing had quickened, the slight tremor that ran through her entire body, and it had nothing to do with the February chill. Something was very wrong here, something that went far beyond the natural nervousness any mail-order bride might feel upon meeting her intended husband for the first time. "Miss Norton," he said, his voice dropping even lower, softer, the tone he used with frightened animals and skittish cattle. "I know this is all very strange and overwhelming. We're strangers to each other, despite the letters we've exchanged. There's no rush for anything. I thought maybe we could stop at the hotel restaurant, get you something warm to drink and a hot meal, let you rest a bit before we head out to the ranch. Would that be all right?" She stared at him for a long moment, those dark eyes searching his face as though trying to determine if this was some kind of trap. Finally, she gave a barely perceptible nod. "That would be acceptable, thank you." He offered his arm, keeping it loose and unthreatening, and watched as she hesitated before placing her hand lightly on his sleeve, maintaining as much distance between them as possible while still observing the social niceties. Her fingers barely touched the fabric of his coat, and he could feel them shaking even through the heavy wool. The Georgetown Hotel stood just down the street from the stage depot, a 2-story wooden building that had been painted white at some point in the past, but now showed the weathering of harsh mountain winters. Zachary guided Gwendolyn inside, acutely aware of the curious stares that followed them, the whispered conversations that started up as soon as they passed. Georgetown was a small town, and the arrival of a mail-order bride was news that would spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. The restaurant occupied the front half of the hotel's main floor, a warm space filled with the scent of coffee and frying bacon. Most of the breakfast crowd had already cleared out, leaving only a few lingering miners nursing cups of coffee before heading to their claims. Zachary chose a table near the window, pulling out a chair for Gwendolyn and waiting until she had seated herself before taking his own seat across from her. She sat rigid in the chair, her back straight as a lodgepole pine, hands folded primly in her lap, eyes fixed on the checkered tablecloth. When the waitress came over, a cheerful woman named Martha who had known Zachary since he first arrived in Georgetown 5 years ago, he ordered coffee and breakfast for both of them, keeping his voice calm and steady. "So," he said once Martha had bustled away toward the kitchen, "your letters mentioned you were from St. Louis. Have you always lived there?" Gwendolyn's fingers twisted together in her lap, a nervous gesture that spoke volumes. "Not always. I grew up in Ohio. My family moved to St. Louis when I was 16. What brought them west? My father thought there would be better opportunities." Her voice remained flat, emotionless, as though she were reciting facts from a school book rather than talking about her own life. He was wrong. Zachary leaned back slightly, giving her more space, noticing how her shoulders relaxed just a fraction when he did. "And your family now? Are they still in St. Louis?" Something flickered across her face, too quick for him to identify, but when she spoke again, her voice had taken on an even more brittle quality. "My parents died 2 years ago. Cholera epidemic. I have no siblings." "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. He knew what it was like to be alone in the world, to have no one to fall back on when times got hard. It was part of what had driven him to place that advertisement in the St. Louis newspaper 6 months ago, seeking a wife to share his life and his ranch in the Colorado mountains. Martha returned with their coffee, and Gwendolyn wrapped both hands around the cup as though trying to draw every bit of warmth from the porcelain. She took a small sip, then another, and Zachary saw some of the color begin to return to her pale cheeks. "Your letters mentioned you worked as a seamstress," he ventured, trying to find some neutral topic that might help her relax. "Yes, I worked for Mrs. Halstead's dress shop on Locust Street." She paused, taking another sip of coffee. The work was adequate. There was something she wasn't saying, some story hiding behind those carefully chosen words, but Zachary didn't push. Instead, he sipped his own coffee and let the silence stretch out between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with all the things neither of them knew how to say. When Martha brought their breakfast, eggs and bacon with thick slices of fresh bread, Gwendolyn looked at the plate as though she hadn't seen that much food in weeks. She ate slowly, methodically, with the careful manners of someone who had been raised to know proper etiquette, but he noticed how her hands had finally stopped shaking. "Tell me about your ranch," she said suddenly, surprising him. It was the first question she had asked, the first sign of genuine curiosity she had shown since stepping off that stage. Zachary felt a smile tug at the corners of his mouth. "It's not much yet, but it's growing. I've got about 500 acres in a valley about 10 miles north of here, good grazing land with a creek running through it. Started with 50 head of cattle 3 years ago, now I'm running close to 200. Built the house myself, got 4 rooms and a proper kitchen. There's a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse I finished just last fall. And you run it alone." She was looking at him now, really looking at him for the first time, and he saw intelligence in those dark eyes, a sharp mind working behind the fear. "I have a hand who helps out. young fellow named Thomas Riley. He's 17, good worker, lives in the bunkhouse near the barn. And there's an older man, Samuel Cross, who comes around when we're doing roundup or branding when we need extra help. But yes, mostly it's just me. It sounds like hard work. It is, he admitted, but it's good work, honest work, and it's mine. He paused, then added carefully, I'm hoping it will be ours. She set down her fork, that brittle tension returning to her posture. Yes, of course. That is why you sent for me. The way she said, it made his chest tighten again. That same nameless emotion from before. There was no joy in her voice, no hope, just resignation, as though she were facing an unpleasant but unavoidable duty. Miss Norton, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, I want you to understand something. I know our arrangement is unconventional. I know we're strangers, but I'm hoping that over time we can build something real together. I'm not expecting anything from you right away. I have a spare bedroom in the house, and you're welcome to use it for as long as you need to feel comfortable. She stared at him, and for a moment he thought he saw tears gathering in her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. That is very kind of you, Mr. Jennings. Please call me Zachary, or Zach if you prefer. Zachary, she repeated softly as though testing the name on her tongue, and you should call me Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn, he echoed, liking the way it sounded, the old-fashioned formality of it. It's a beautiful name. The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips, gone almost before he could register it. My mother chose it. She had romantic notions. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence than before, and when Zachary paid the bill and helped Gwendolyn back into her worn coat, he noticed that she didn't flinch quite as much at his proximity. It was a small thing, but he counted it as a victory. The wagon ride out to the ranch took them north through terrain that grew progressively more wild and beautiful. The road, such as it was, wound through stands of pine and aspen, following the course of a creek that ran silver and swift with snowmelt from the higher elevations. Zachary kept the horses to a steady walk, partly because the road was rough and partly because he wanted Gwendolyn to have time to take in her new home. She sat beside him on the wagon seat, her carpetbag clutched on her lap, eyes taking in the towering peaks that surrounded them on all sides. The fear he had seen at the stage depot had faded somewhat, replaced by something that might have been wonder. It's so vast, she murmured, more to herself than to him. So empty. Not empty, he corrected gently. Just open. There's life everywhere if you know how to look for it. See there. He pointed to a stand of aspen where a small herd of mule deer were browsing on the new growth. And there, those tracks in the mud. Mountain lion passed through here sometime last night. She tensed at the mention of the lion, and he mentally kicked himself for being thoughtless. Don't worry, he added quickly. They stay away from people mostly. In 5 years out here, I've only seen 2, and both times they ran off before I could get a good look at them. You've been here 5 years, she asked, still watching the deer. About that, yes. Came out from Kansas after the war. She turned to look at him then, really study him, and he wondered what she saw. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from hard work, with brown hair that tended to curl when it got too long and gray eyes that his mother used to say could see right through to a person's soul. He had a few scars, a crooked nose from a long-ago fight and hands that were calloused and rough from years of ranch work. You fought in the war, she asked softly. Tail end of it. I was just 16 when I enlisted, lied about my age to get in. Saw action for about a year before it all ended. That must have been terrible. It was, he said simply. There was no point in lying about it, no point in trying to paint it as something noble or glorious when it had been nothing but mud and blood and the screams of dying men. But it's over now, has been for more than a decade. I try not to think about it much." They rode in silence for a while longer, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon, the jingle of harness, and the rush of the creek beside the road. Zachary found himself stealing glances at Gwendolyn, trying to piece together the puzzle she presented. She was educated, that much was clear from her speech and manners. She had known real hardship, judging from the worn state of her clothes and the hunger with which she had attacked her breakfast. And she was afraid, deeply afraid of something or someone. As they rounded a bend in the road, the valley opened up before them, and Zachary felt the familiar swell of pride that came every time he saw his ranch spread out below. The house sat on a slight rise overlooking the creek, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney already sending up a thin stream of smoke. Thomas must have gotten the fire going, knowing they would be arriving soon. The barn stood about 100 yards from the house, newly painted red, and beyond it he could see the dark shapes of cattle grazing in the meadow. "There it is," he said quietly. "Home." Gwendolyn leaned forward slightly, her eyes taking in every detail. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and this time he was certain he heard genuine emotion in her voice, something that sounded almost like longing. As they drew closer, a young man emerged from the barn, waving a greeting. Thomas Riley was a gangling youth with bright red hair and a face full of freckles, all elbows and enthusiasm. He had shown up at the ranch 2 years ago, orphaned and hungry, looking for work, and Zachary had taken him on partly out of pity and partly because he had needed the help. It had turned out to be one of the best decisions he had ever made. Thomas worked hard, learned fast, and had a natural way with horses that bordered on magical. "Boss," Thomas called out as Zachary pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Made it back safe, I see." His eyes slid to Gwendolyn with undisguised curiosity. "Thomas, this is Miss Gwendolyn Norton, my intended. Gwendolyn, this is Thomas Riley, my hired hand." Thomas snatched his hat off his head and gave an awkward bow. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Real pleased. Boss has been talking about you coming for weeks now." A faint blush colored Gwendolyn's cheeks, and Zachary shot Thomas a look that said clearly, "Not helping." The young man had the grace to look abashed. "Let me help you down," Zachary said, moving around to Gwendolyn's side of the wagon. He held out his hand, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her gloved hand in his. Even through the layers of fabric, he could feel how small and delicate her hand was, how it trembled slightly as she climbed down from the wagon seat. "Thomas, would you mind bringing Miss Norton's trunk from the back?" Zachary asked, though in truth there was only the single carpet bag. He saw understanding flash in the young man's eyes, a recognition that his boss wanted a few moments alone with his bride. "Sure thing, boss. I'll get it sorted." Zachary guided Gwendolyn toward the house, acutely aware of how she held herself, still tense, still wary, but perhaps not quite as terrified as she had been that morning. He pushed open the front door and stood back to let her enter first. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one, with a large stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. The furniture was simple but well made, mostly things Zachary had built himself during the long winter evenings. A sturdy table with 4 chairs occupied the space near the kitchen area, while 2 comfortable chairs flanked the fireplace. Rag rugs covered the plank floor, adding spots of color to the otherwise utilitarian space. "It's not fancy," Zachary said, suddenly seeing the room through her eyes and finding it wanting. "But it's warm and dry and solid." Gwendolyn moved slowly into the room, her eyes taking in every detail. She touched the back of one of the chairs, ran her fingers along the edge of the table, moved to the window to look out at the view of the valley. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "It's wonderful. Truly, I have not had a real home in a very long time." The admission seemed to cost her something, and he saw her shoulders hunch slightly as though she regretted revealing that much. "Well, it's your home now," he said gently. "For as long as you want it to be. Let me show you the rest." He led her through a door off the main room into a short hallway. "There are 3 other rooms. This one here," he opened the first door, "is yours. I cleaned it out last week, put fresh linens on the bed. There's a wardrobe for your things and a washstand. The window faces east, so you'll get the morning sun." The room was small but comfortable, with an iron frame bed covered in a colorful quilt, a wooden wardrobe, and a small table holding a ceramic washbasin and pitcher. Gwendolyn stepped inside, moving to touch the quilt with something that looked like reverence. "This is beautiful work," she said, examining the intricate pattern of stars and diamonds. "My mother made it," Zachary said, "before she passed. I have several of her quilts stored away." This one seemed appropriate for a bedroom. Gwendolyn turned to look at him, and for the first time since she had stepped off that stage, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear. "Thank you for this, for all of this. I know I have not been very gracious, and I apologize. The truth is, I am grateful to be here, even though I am also frightened." Her honesty surprised him, and he found himself responding in kind. "I understand being frightened. This is a big change for both of us. I have been living alone out here for a long time, and the truth is, I am not entirely sure how to share my space with someone else. So I expect we'll both make mistakes and have to figure things out as we go." She studied his face for a long moment, and he thought he saw some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "That seems fair. The room next to yours is mine," he continued, moving back into the hallway. "And the one at the end is just storage right now, but I thought maybe it could be something else eventually. A sewing room, perhaps, or a nursery." He felt his face heat at the last word, but pushed forward. "Whatever you might need." "A sewing room would be lovely," Gwendolyn said quietly. "I have missed having proper space to work." They returned to the main room, where Thomas had deposited Gwendolyn's carpetbag near her bedroom door and was waiting by the fireplace, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "All set, boss," he said. "I should probably get back to work. The new heifer was looking like she might be ready to calve, and I want to keep an eye on her." "Thanks, Thomas. I'll be out to help in a bit." After the young man had left, Zachary turned back to Gwendolyn, searching for the right words. "I know you must be exhausted from your journey. Why don't you rest for a while? I need to tend to some ranch business, but I'll be back in a few hours to start dinner, unless you would prefer to cook. I don't want to assume anything about how we will divide the household tasks." Gwendolyn looked at him with something that might have been surprise. Most men would simply expect their wives to handle all the domestic duties. "I'm not most men," Zachary said simply. "And like I said, we're figuring this out as we go. I have been cooking for myself for 5 years now. I'm not particularly skilled at it, but I can manage basic meals. If you want to take over the cooking, I would be grateful, but I don't expect it, especially not today when you have just arrived." She nodded slowly, processing this information. "I think I would like to rest if that is acceptable. The journey was very long and I did not sleep well." "Of course. Make yourself at home. There's fresh water in the pitcher in your room, and if you need anything else, just let me know." He left her there, grabbing his hat from the peg by the door and heading out into the bright afternoon sunshine. As he walked toward the barn, he found his mind churning with questions. What had put that fear in Gwendolyn's eyes? What had she been running from in St. Louis? And how could he help her feel safe here, in this wild and beautiful place that he called home? Thomas was in the barn, checking on the pregnant heifer when Zachary entered. The young man looked up with barely contained curiosity. "She seems nice," he ventured carefully. "She does," Zachary agreed, "and she's scared half to death. Of you, of something, I'm not sure what yet." Zachary leaned against the stall door, watching the heifer pace restlessly. "Keep an eye out for trouble, will you? If anyone comes around asking questions, anyone you don't know, I want to hear about it right away." Thomas's eyes widened. "You think she's running from something?" "I think she's running from someone," Zachary corrected. "I saw a bruise on her jaw, mostly hidden but there. And the way she flinches when someone gets too close, the fear in her voice. Those are the signs of a woman who's been hurt. You think her husband?" She said she has no family, but that doesn't mean there wasn't a man in her life. Could be a husband, could be someone else. Zachary straightened, his jaw setting in a hard line. "Either way, she's under my protection now. Anyone who wants to hurt her will have to go through me first." Thomas grinned. "Yes, sir, I'll keep watch." The afternoon passed in the familiar rhythm of ranch work. Zachary checked on the cattle, repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by falling branches during the last snowstorm, and helped Thomas with the evening feeding. The physical labor felt good, gave him something to focus on besides the mystery that was Gwendolyn Norton. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Zachary washed up at the pump outside the barn and headed back to the house. He found Gwendolyn in the kitchen, wearing a faded apron he didn't recognize, stirring something that smelled absolutely heavenly in a pot on the stove. She turned when she heard him enter, and he saw that some of the color had returned to her face, that she looked less like a frightened rabbit and more like a woman finding her footing in unfamiliar territory. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the pot. "I found some beans and salt pork in your pantry, and there were potatoes in the root cellar. I thought I would make dinner after all. Resting was good, but I have spent too many days sitting on that stagecoach. I needed to do something with my hands." "I don't mind at all," Zachary said, hanging his hat on the peg and moving to the wash basin to clean his hands more thoroughly. "It smells wonderful. I usually just fry up whatever I can find and call it good." "I noticed your pantry is somewhat sparse," she observed. "If you would like, I could make a list of supplies we might need, and perhaps next time you go into town you could pick them up. Or we could go together," he suggested. "Georgetown has a general store with a decent selection, and the proprietor, Mr. Hartwell, is always happy to order in special items if needed." She tensed slightly at the suggestion, and he mentally kicked himself again. Of course she wouldn't want to parade through town as the new mail-order bride, subject to curious stares and whispered gossip. "Or I can go alone," he added quickly. "Whatever you're more comfortable with." Gwendolyn was quiet for a moment, stirring the pot with slow, deliberate movements. "I will need to face the town eventually," she said finally. "I cannot hide out here forever, no matter how appealing that might sound, but perhaps not immediately. Perhaps in a week or two once I have had time to settle in." "That sounds reasonable," Zachary agreed. He set the table while she finished the cooking, and they sat down to eat together as the last light faded from the sky outside. The meal was simple but delicious, better than anything Zachary had managed to cook for himself in 5 years of trying. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind that could exist between two people who were beginning to find their rhythm with each other. After dinner, Gwendolyn insisted on washing the dishes while Zachary dried and put them away. They worked side by side at the counter, and he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the soft sounds of her breathing, the way her sleeve occasionally brushed against his arm. "Tell me about Kansas," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You said you came from there originally." Born and raised on a farm outside of Lawrence, he replied, grateful for the neutral topic. My father raised wheat mostly, some cattle on the side. It was good land, good farming. But after the war, after my parents both died within a year of each other, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories, I guess. I sold the farm and headed west, looking for something new. And you found this place. Eventually. I worked a few different ranches first, learned the cattle business, saved up enough money to buy land of my own. This valley was going cheap because it's so remote, hard to get to in winter, but I fell in love with it the moment I saw it. I can understand why, Gwendolyn said softly. It is beautiful here, wild but beautiful. They finished the dishes and moved to the chairs by the fireplace. Zachary added a few logs to keep the flames burning bright, then settled into his usual seat. Gwendolyn took the other chair, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, staring into the fire. "May I ask you a personal question?" Zachary said after a while. She tensed but nodded. "You may ask." "I cannot promise I will answer." "That's fair." He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "The bruise on your jaw, someone hurt you." It wasn't really a question, and she didn't treat it as one. She lifted one hand unconsciously to touch the spot, then dropped it back to her lap. "Yes." "Was it your husband?" "I have never been married," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there was a man. In St. Louis. After my parents died, I had nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. He offered me work in his household, promised to take care of me. I was desperate, so I accepted." Zachary felt a cold anger settling in his chest, but he kept his voice gentle. "What happened?" "He lied," she said simply. "The work was not what he had promised. The household was not what he had promised. He wanted things from me that I was not willing to give, and when I refused, he became violent." "Did he force himself on you?" The question tasted like ash in his mouth, but he needed to know. "No," she said, and he saw her shoulders relax slightly. "Not in that way, though not for lack of trying. I managed to escape before it went that far. A woman I knew, another seamstress, helped me hide for several weeks while I saved money and made plans to leave St. Louis. When I saw your advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like providence. A chance to start over somewhere he could never find me." "What's his name?" Zachary asked, his voice hard. "It doesn't matter," Gwendolyn said quickly. "He's there and I'm here. That's all that matters. It matters if he comes looking for you." She turned to look at him then, and he saw the fear back in her eyes, sharp and bright. "Do you think he would travel all this way?" "I don't know," Zachary admitted. "But if he does, he'll find that you're not alone anymore. You're under my protection now, Gwendolyn, mine and the law's. If he shows his face here, he'll answer for what he did to you." Tears gathered in her eyes, and this time she didn't blink them back. They spilled over, running down her cheeks in silent streams. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I could be anyone, could be lying about everything." "You're not lying," he said softly. "I can see that much. And as for why I'm being kind, well, that's just how people should treat each other, isn't it? Especially people who are planning to build a life together." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, sniffling slightly. "I am sorry. I do not usually cry like this. It has been a very long few weeks." "Don't apologize," Zachary said. "You've been through an ordeal. Tears are nothing to be ashamed of." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the fire burn down to embers. Eventually, Gwendolyn stood, smoothing down her skirts. "I think I should retire for the evening," she said. "Tomorrow I would like to begin making myself useful around here, if that is acceptable." "More than acceptable," Zachary replied, rising as well. "But don't feel like you need to prove yourself. Take the time you need to settle in." She gave him a small, genuine smile, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look younger, less burdened. "Good night, Zachary." "Good night, Gwendolyn." He watched her disappear into her bedroom, then stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Whatever he had expected when he sent for a mail-order bride, it wasn't this. It wasn't a woman with fear in her voice and shadows in her eyes, wasn't the fierce protective instinct that rose up in him whenever he looked at her. But life had a way of surprising you, he reflected as he banked the fire and headed to his own room. All he could do was take it one day at a time and hope that patience and gentleness would be enough to help Gwendolyn find her way from fear to trust. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Zachary rose before dawn to tend to the ranch work, and by the time he returned to the house for breakfast, Gwendolyn would have a meal waiting. They ate together, making quiet conversation about safe topics like the weather, the cattle, the supplies they needed. Then he would head back out to work while she cleaned the house, did laundry, or worked on sewing projects. She had brought a small collection of sewing supplies in that worn carpet bag, and within the first week, she had mended all of Zachary's work clothes, darned his socks, and started piecing together a new quilt from fabric scraps she had scavenged from various sources. He would come in for dinner to find her bent over her needlework in the fading light, her fingers moving with quick, practiced efficiency. Slowly, incrementally, she began to relax. The fear in her eyes didn't disappear entirely, but it faded, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. She still flinched occasionally when he moved too quickly, still maintained a careful physical distance, but she had stopped looking at him like he might strike her at any moment. 3 weeks after her arrival, a late winter storm rolled through the valley, dumping 2 feet of snow overnight and making it impossible to work outside. Zachary woke to find the world transformed into a pristine white landscape, beautiful but treacherous. He made his way to the barn to check on the animals, then returned to the house, brushing snow from his coat and hat. Gwendolyn was already up, making coffee and frying bacon. She looked up when he entered and he saw concern in her eyes. "The storm is bad?" she asked. "Bad enough," he replied. "We'll be stuck inside for a day or two until it clears. I made sure the animals have plenty of food and water, and Thomas is snug in the bunkhouse with enough supplies to last him through. Then we should make the most of being inside," she said practically. "I noticed the hinges on the pantry door were squeaking. Do you have oil to fix them?" He did, and they spent the morning doing small repairs around the house, working together in companionable silence. She held tools while he tightened loose nails, and he steadied the ladder while she cleaned the high windows. It felt domestic and comfortable, like they were a real married couple rather than 2 near strangers brought together by circumstances and a newspaper advertisement. Around midday, they took a break for lunch, sitting at the table with bowls of hot soup and thick slices of bread. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside the house was warm and cozy, insulated from the storm. "I have been thinking," Gwendolyn said, breaking the silence, "about our arrangement." Zachary's heart sank. Was she going to say she wanted to leave, that this wasn't working, that she had made a mistake in coming here? "What about it?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "We have been living as housemates," she continued, not meeting his eyes. "Which has been good, has given me time to adjust, but I know that is not what you intended when you sent for a bride. I know you must want more than just someone to cook and clean." He set down his spoon carefully, considering his words. "Gwendolyn, I meant what I said when you first arrived. I'm not expecting anything from you until you're ready. If that takes months or even years, then so be it. I would rather have you comfortable and happy than force something neither of us is ready for." She did look at him then, and he saw confusion in her eyes. "But why? Most men would have insisted on their marital rights by now, whether I was ready or not." "I'm not most men," he said, repeating what he had told her on that first day. "And those aren't rights, they're privileges that should be earned through trust and mutual respect. My parents had a good marriage, a loving one. They were partners in every sense of the word. That's what I want. Not some scared woman who feels obligated to submit to me out of duty." Gwendolyn's eyes were shining again, but these tears looked different from the ones she had shed that first night. "You are unlike any man I have ever known," she whispered. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He asked, trying to lighten the mood. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "It is a very good thing, and I wanted you to know that I am beginning to feel safe here, with you. It is a strange feeling after so long being afraid, but I like it." "I'm glad," he said simply, and meant it with everything in him. That afternoon they sat by the fire while the storm raged outside. Zachary whittled a piece of wood, working on a new handle for a hammer that had broken, while Gwendolyn worked on her sewing. They talked more than they ever had before, sharing stories about their childhoods, their families, the paths that had led them both to this moment. He learned that her mother had taught her to sew when she was just 5 years old, that she had a talent for it that went beyond simple mending. She dreamed of one day having her own dress shop, creating beautiful gowns for special occasions. She learned that he had always loved working with his hands, that he found peace in the physical labor of ranching, in watching things grow and thrive under his care. He dreamed of expanding his herd, maybe eventually breeding horses as well as cattle. As the day wore on and evening approached, Zachary realized something important. He was falling in love with Gwendolyn Norton. Not the way he had imagined when he first placed that advertisement, not some abstract attraction to the idea of a wife. This was real, grounded in the quiet moments they had shared, in her strength and resilience, in the way her face lit up when she smiled, rare as those smiles still were. He didn't tell her, of course. It was too soon, and she had enough to deal with without adding the pressure of his feelings to the mix. But he held the knowledge close, a warm secret in his chest, and let it inform the way he treated her, the patience and gentleness he showed. The storm lasted 2 days, and by the time it cleared, leaving the world glittering and white, Zachary felt like something fundamental had shifted between them. They moved around each other with greater ease now, the careful formality of those first weeks giving way to something more natural. A month after Gwendolyn's arrival, Zachary needed to make a trip into Georgetown for supplies. He had been putting it off, making do with what they had, because he didn't want to leave her alone for the full day the journey would require. But they were running low on essentials, things they couldn't do without. At breakfast, he broached the subject carefully. "I need to go into town today, get supplies. I should be back before dark, but it will be a long day. Will you be all right here by yourself? Thomas will be around if you need anything." Gwendolyn looked up from her eggs and he saw her wrestling with something internally. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and said, "I would like to come with you, if that is acceptable." "Are you sure?" he asked. "I know you wanted to wait before facing the town." "I have waited long enough," she said firmly. "I cannot hide forever, and besides, I would like to see Georgetown properly, not just the view from a stagecoach window." "All right then," Zachary agreed, feeling a swell of pride at her courage. "We'll leave in an hour." The ride into Georgetown was beautiful, the sun sparkling off the snow-covered landscape, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. Gwendolyn sat beside him on the wagon seat, bundled in her worn coat and a thick shawl he had given her, her cheeks pink from the cold. When they reached town, Zachary helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm. She took it without hesitation this time, and they walked down the wooden sidewalk together toward Hartwell's general store. The store was warm and crowded, filled with the mingled scents of coffee, spices, leather, and tobacco. Mr. Hartwell, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, greeted them with genuine warmth. "Zachary, good to see you, and this must be the bride. Welcome, welcome. Word around town is that you arrived about a month back. We were wondering when we'd get to meet you properly." Gwendolyn handled the attention with grace, smiling politely and answering questions without revealing too much about herself. Zachary watched her move through the store, examining fabric and notions with the practiced eye of a seamstress, discussing recipes with the proprietor's wife, and felt that warm glow in his chest intensify. They were loading their purchases into the wagon when a stranger approached. He was a well-dressed man, out of place in the rough mining town, with slicked-back dark hair and calculating eyes. Something about him immediately set Zachary on edge. "Excuse me," the man said, his gaze fixed on Gwendolyn. "I wonder if I might have a word." Gwendolyn had gone absolutely rigid beside him, her face draining of color. Zachary moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the stranger. "I'm afraid we're in a hurry," he said coolly. "Whatever you're selling, we're not interested." "I'm not selling anything," the man replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm looking for someone. A young woman who went missing from St. Louis some months back. Her employer is quite concerned about her welfare." The blood roared in Zachary's ears, but he kept his voice level. "Is that so? Well, I'm afraid we can't help you. My wife and I are from Kansas originally. We don't know anyone in St. Louis." The man's eyes narrowed. "Your wife, you say? And how long have you been married?" "Long enough," Zachary replied, his patience wearing thin. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a long ride ahead of us." He helped Gwendolyn up onto the wagon seat, noting how badly she was trembling, and climbed up beside her. The stranger watched them drive away, and Zachary could feel his gaze boring into his back until they rounded a corner and left the town behind. They rode in tense silence for several miles before Gwendolyn finally spoke, her voice shaking. "That was him. Not the man who hurt me, but one of his associates. He must have sent someone to look for me." "I figured as much," Zachary said grimly. "But he has no proof of anything, and even if he did, you're not property to be dragged back against your will." "You do not understand," Gwendolyn said, and now there was real panic in her voice. "The man I escaped from, Mr. Vernon Caldwell, he is wealthy and powerful. He has connections everywhere. If he wants me back badly enough, he will find a way." "Why does he want you back?" Zachary asked. "If you'll pardon my bluntness, there are plenty of desperate women in St. Louis who would take whatever work he was offering." "Why pursue you specifically?" Gwendolyn was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisted together in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because I saw something I was not supposed to see. I overheard a conversation between him and some other men about illegal activities, about bribes and corruption. He knows that I could ruin him if I went to the authorities. That is why he kept me prisoner in his house, why he became violent when I tried to leave. Not because he cared about me, but because I was a liability." Zachary felt the full weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. This was more serious than a woman running from a bad situation. This was dangerous, potentially deadly. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" he asked. "Because he owns the authorities," she said bitterly. "The police, the judges, everyone who matters in St. Louis. They would never believe a poor seamstress over a man like Vernon Caldwell. I would have ended up in prison, or worse, dead." They were approaching the turnoff to the ranch when Zachary made a decision. He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face Gwendolyn fully. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I meant what I said before. You're under my protection now, but I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? She searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded. I trust you. Good. Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow, I'm going to ride into Georgetown and talk to the sheriff. Carl Mitchell is a good man, honest, and he owes me a favor. I'm going to tell him the situation, and we're going to make sure that if anyone comes around asking questions or making threats, they'll be dealt with legally. But what if the sheriff is like the ones in St. Louis? What if he cannot be trusted? He can be, Zachary assured her. Carl fought in the war same as me. We rode together for a time. I would trust him with my life, and I'll trust him with yours. And what about the man from today? He knows I am here now. He suspects you're here, Zachary corrected, but he has no proof. And tomorrow, after I talk to Carl, we're going to give you some legal protection of your own. We're going to get married properly and legally. Once you're my wife in the eyes of the law, it becomes much harder for anyone to claim they have some right to you. Gwendolyn's eyes widened. Married? But I know that was the plan eventually, but so soon. It doesn't have to change anything about how we live, Zachary said quickly. You'll still have your own room, your own space, but it gives you legal protection. As my wife, you have rights. You can't be dragged off against your will, and anyone who tries will have to answer to both me and the law. She considered this, and he could see the wheels turning in her mind, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, she nodded. All right, yes, let us get married. They completed the drive back to the ranch in thoughtful silence. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the weight of the day's events hung heavy in the air. I am sorry, Gwendolyn said suddenly, setting down her fork. I have brought trouble to your doorstep. You did not sign up for any of this when you placed that advertisement. Gwendolyn, Zachary said, reaching across the table to take her hand. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact, and he felt her stiffen slightly before relaxing. I'm not sorry, not one bit. Yes, this is complicated, and yes, there might be trouble ahead. But having you here, getting to know you, that's been worth any amount of complication. Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but she didn't pull her hand away. How can you say that? You barely know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're brave and resourceful. I know you're kind and hardworking. I know you make the best beans I have ever tasted and that you hum sometimes when you sew. I know that when you smile, really smile, it lights up your whole face. And I know that I want to keep learning more, for as long as you'll let me. She squeezed his hand, her fingers warm in his. I want that too, she whispered. I am beginning to realize that what I feel for you is more than just gratitude, more than just relief at being safe. I think I might be falling in love with you, Zachary Jennings, and that terrifies me almost as much as Vernon Caldwell does. His heart soared at her words, but he kept his voice steady. Love doesn't have to be terrifying, not the right kind of love. Teach me, she said, her eyes locked on his. Teach me what the right kind of love looks like. I will, he promised. And you can teach me too, because I'm figuring this out as I go just like you are. They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, and Zachary felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like rightness, like coming home. The next morning, Zachary rode into Georgetown alone, despite Gwendolyn's offer to come with him. He needed to handle this carefully, needed to make sure all the legal protections were in place before that stranger or anyone else came sniffing around again. Sheriff Carl Mitchell had his office in a small building near the center of town. He was a few years older than Zachary, a solid man with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He looked up when Zachary entered, a smile spreading across his weathered face. Zach, good to see you. Heard you brought yourself a bride out from St. Louis. Congratulations. Thanks, Carl. Actually, That's what I need to talk to you about." Zachary settled into the chair across from the sheriff's desk and proceeded to lay out the whole story, leaving nothing out. Carl listened intently, his expression growing more serious as Zachary spoke. When Zachary finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "This is a serious situation," he said finally. "If what your bride says is true, if this Caldwell fellow is as connected as she claims, then having one of his men show up here looking for her is bad news. I know. That's why I need your help. I need to know that if anyone tries to take her, they'll be arrested." "Well, that part's easy enough," Carl said. "Colorado law is clear. A woman can't be held against her will or forced to return somewhere she doesn't want to go. If anyone tries to take her by force, that's kidnapping, and I'll arrest them faster than they can blink. But there's another problem." "What's that?" "If this Caldwell has the kind of money and connections you're describing, he could make legal trouble. File some kind of claim, say she stole from him or breached a contract, try to get her extradited back to Missouri to face charges. It would all be lies, of course, but it could tie you up in legal proceedings for months, maybe years." Zachary felt his jaw tighten. "So what do we do?" "You marry her, officially and legally, like you're planning. That gives her some protection as your wife. But more than that, I think we need to get ahead of this. I'll send some telegrams, make some inquiries. I've got connections of my own, friends in law enforcement in other territories. Let's find out exactly what kind of man this Vernon Caldwell is and whether there are any actual legal claims against your Gwendolyn. If there aren't, and he's just trying to intimidate her into coming back, then we can shut this down before it goes any further." "I appreciate that, Carl. Really." The sheriff waved off his thanks. "We take care of our own out here, Zach. You know that. Now about this wedding. You want to do it quickly, today if possible. Today works. Judge Peterson is in town for the week, handling some mining disputes. I can ask him to perform the ceremony this afternoon if you want to ride back and get your bride." "I'd appreciate that. But Carl, one more thing. That man who came looking for her yesterday, if he's still in town, I want to know about it." "Already on it," Carl said, rising from his chair. "I'll ask around, see what I can find out. You head back to your ranch, collect Miss Norton, and come back this afternoon. Say around 2 o'clock. That'll give me time to set everything up." Zachary rode back to the ranch with a lighter heart than he had left with. Gwendolyn met him at the door, anxiety written all over her face. "What did the sheriff say?" she asked before he had even dismounted. "He's on our side," Zachary assured her, swinging down from his horse and moving to take her hands in his. "He's going to make some inquiries, find out exactly what we're dealing with. And he's arranged for us to be married this afternoon at 2 o'clock if you're still willing." "I am," she said without hesitation. "But Zachary, I have nothing to wear. My dress is old and worn, hardly suitable for a wedding." He squeezed her hands gently. "You could wear a flour sack and you'd still be the most beautiful bride I've ever seen. But if it matters to you, we can stop by the general store on the way back into town, see if they have anything suitable." Her eyes lit up at that, and he realized with a pang that she probably hadn't had anything new to wear in years. "Could we? I know it is silly to care about such things, but I would like to look nice for our wedding, even if it is just a formality." "It's not silly," he said firmly. "And it's not just a formality, not to me. I know we're doing this partly for legal protection, but Gwendolyn, I meant what I said last night. I want this marriage to be real. I want to build a life with you." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. It was the first time she had initiated any kind of physical affection, and the gesture nearly undid him. "I want that too," she said softly. "More than I thought possible." They rode back to Georgetown together, and Zachary waited patiently while Gwendolyn browsed the limited selection of ready-made dresses at the general store. She finally settled on a simple dress in a soft blue fabric that brought out the color of her eyes. It wasn't fancy, but it was new and clean and fit her well, and when she emerged from the back room where she had changed, Zachary felt his breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it with his whole heart. A becoming blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. I feel beautiful, which is something I have not felt in a very long time." Judge Peterson's office was in the same building as the sheriff's, and when they arrived, they found Carl waiting for them along with two other people. Thomas Riley, who had apparently been summoned to serve as a witness, and Martha from the hotel restaurant. "Figured you'd want some friendly faces," Carl explained with a grin. "And Martha here insisted on being involved once she heard there was a wedding happening." "I brought you this," Martha said, pressing a small bouquet of dried flowers into Gwendolyn's hands. "I know it's not much, but every bride should have flowers." Gwendolyn clutched the bouquet, tears gathering in her eyes. Thank you so much." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Judge Peterson, a kindly older man with a shock of white hair, read through the traditional vows, asking if Zachary took Gwendolyn to be his lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. Zachary answered with a firm "I do," his eyes never leaving Gwendolyn's face. When it was her turn, Gwendolyn's voice wavered only slightly as she spoke her own vows, promising to honor and cherish him for as long as they both lived. She said, "I do," like she meant it, like it was more than just words on paper, and Zachary felt his heart swell. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Peterson declared. "You may kiss your bride." Zachary hesitated, not wanting to presume, but Gwendolyn stepped forward and rose up on her toes, pressing a soft, chaste kiss to his lips. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to send warmth flooding through his entire body. Thomas whooped and clapped, and Martha dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Carl shook Zachary's hand and kissed Gwendolyn's cheek, welcoming her officially to Georgetown. "Now then," Judge Peterson said, producing the marriage certificate, "sign here, both of you, and your witnesses as well. This makes it all legal and binding." They signed, the scratch of pen on paper somehow significant, somehow final. Zachary watched Gwendolyn sign her new name, Gwendolyn Jennings, and felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. She was his wife now, truly and legally, and heaven help anyone who tried to hurt her. Martha insisted on treating them to a meal at the hotel restaurant to celebrate, and they sat together, the small group of friends, sharing food and conversation. Zachary kept stealing glances at Gwendolyn, this woman who was now his wife, and found her looking back at him with something warm and wondering in her eyes. As the afternoon wore on, Carl pulled Zachary aside while the others were distracted. "I did some asking around," the sheriff said quietly. "That stranger checked out of his hotel this morning and took the stage east. Doesn't mean he won't be back or that Caldwell won't send someone else, but for now the immediate threat seems to have passed." "That's good news," Zachary said, relief washing through him. "I also sent those telegrams I mentioned. Called in some favors, reached out to some contacts in Missouri. I should hear back in a few days. In the meantime, keep your eyes open and your rifle loaded. If anyone comes around your ranch making trouble, you deal with them however you need to, and I'll back you up with the law." "I appreciate that, Carl, more than I can say." "That's what friends are for. Now go on, get your bride home. It's your wedding day after all." The ride back to the ranch as the sun began to set was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, filled with the unspoken understanding that something fundamental had changed between them. They were married now, bound together legally, and Zachary hoped, emotionally. When they reached the ranch, he helped Gwendolyn down from the wagon and, acting on impulse, swept her up into his arms to carry her over the threshold. She let out a surprised laugh, her arms going around his neck, and he felt the sound of it resonate somewhere deep in his chest. "What are you doing?" she asked, still laughing. "It's tradition," he said, pushing open the door with his shoulder. "Carrying your bride over the threshold on your wedding day. I did not know you were a traditional man." "Only about some things," he replied, setting her gently on her feet once they were inside. "Only about the things that matter." They stood there in the fading light, looking at each other, and Zachary saw the moment when Gwendolyn's expression shifted from amusement to something deeper, something more serious. "Zachary," she said softly, "I know we said that getting married would not change our living arrangements, that I would still have my own room. And I appreciate that, truly. But I find myself wanting something different now. I find myself wanting to be a real wife to you in every sense of the word." His heart hammered against his ribs. "Are you sure? There's no rush, Gwendolyn. I meant what I said about taking all the time you need." "I am sure," she said, reaching up to touch his face again, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You have been nothing but patient and kind. You have made me feel safe in a way I never thought I would feel again. And somewhere along the way, patience and kindness turned into something else, into love. I love you, Zachary Jennings, and I want to be your wife in truth." "I love you too," he said, the words coming easily, naturally. "I have for weeks now, I think. I was just waiting for the right time to tell you." She smiled then, that full, radiant smile that transformed her face, and rose up on her toes to kiss him again. This kiss was different from the brief touch of lips in the judge's office. This was deeper, more passionate, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked one more time, needing to be sure. "I have never been more certain of anything," she replied. "Take me to bed, husband." He did, leading her to his bedroom, the larger of the two, with the big bed and the window that faced the mountains. They came together slowly, tenderly, Zachary mindful of her past trauma, determined to make this good for her, to show her what it was like to be loved rather than hurt. She responded to his gentleness with a passion that surprised and delighted him, her body arching into his touch, her hands exploring the planes of his chest and back with growing confidence. When they finally joined, moving together in the ancient rhythm, it felt like coming home, like finding a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Gwendolyn's head resting on his chest, his fingers combing gently through her unbound hair. "That was nothing like I expected," she said softly, her breath warm against his skin. "In a good way, I hope?" "In the best way," she confirmed. "The man who hurt me, he made me think that this part of marriage would be something to endure, something painful and degrading. But with you, it was beautiful. You made me feel cherished." "You are cherished," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And you always will be for as long as I draw breath." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Zachary thought that he had never been happier or more content in his entire life. The weeks that followed their wedding were the happiest Zachary could remember. Gwendolyn settled fully into her role as his wife, moving her belongings from the spare room into his bedroom, which they now shared. She brought her own touches to the house, small changes that made it feel more like a home. Curtains she sewed for the windows, a tablecloth embroidered with wildflowers, a braided rug for the floor by the fireplace. The physical intimacy between them deepened and grew, each night bringing new discoveries, new ways to bring each other pleasure. Gwendolyn's initial shyness gave way to confidence, and she became bolder in expressing what she wanted, what she needed. Zachary loved watching her come into her own, loved the way she laughed more freely now, the way the shadows had finally left her eyes. Spring came early to the valley that year, the snow melting to reveal new grass pushing up through the earth. The cattle grew fat on the fresh grazing, and several of the cows calved, adding to the herd. Thomas proved himself invaluable during the busy season, and Zachary found himself able to spend more time at the house, more time with Gwendolyn. One evening in early April, about 6 weeks after their wedding, Gwendolyn announced over dinner that she had finished the quilt she had been working on. It was a beautiful piece, a pattern of interlocking stars and shades of blue and green that reminded Zachary of the mountains and sky. "It is for our bed," she explained, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I wanted to make something that was just ours." "It's beautiful," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You're incredibly talented, Gwendolyn. You know Georgetown doesn't have a proper dress shop. The women around here have to order their nice clothes from Denver or make do with what the general store carries. I bet you could build a good business if you wanted to." Her eyes lit up with interest. "Do you really think so? I have been thinking about it, actually. I have so much time during the day while you are working, and I love sewing. It would be wonderful to do it professionally again. We could set up the spare room as a proper sewing room," Zachary suggested. "Get you a good table, maybe put in some better lighting. Word would spread fast in a town this size. Within a month, you would probably have more work than you could handle." "I would like that," she said, her smile wide and genuine. "I would like that very much." They were making plans, discussing what supplies she would need and how to advertise her services, when they heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Zachary tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle that hung over the door, but then he recognized the rider as Sheriff Carl Mitchell. Carl dismounted quickly, his face grim, and Zachary knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, stepping out onto the porch with Gwendolyn just behind him. "Got some news from Missouri," Carl said without preamble. "My contacts finally got back to me about Vernon Caldwell. Zach, it's worse than we thought. The man is under federal investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and a half-dozen other charges, and it looks like someone in his organization has been talking to the authorities, providing evidence against him." Zachary felt Gwendolyn stiffen beside him. "You think they believe I am the one who talked?" "I think it's a distinct possibility," Carl said. "The informant is listed as anonymous, and the information provided matches up with the kind of thing you said you overheard. Whether you are the actual informant or not, Caldwell probably thinks you are. So he will come for me," Gwendolyn said, her voice small but steady. "He will want to silence me before I can testify against him." "Maybe," Carl allowed. "But here's the thing. According to my sources, Caldwell himself is currently detained in St. Louis, out on bail pending trial. He can't leave the state, and most of his known associates are either in custody themselves or being watched closely by the authorities. So we're safe?" Zachary asked, though he could hear the doubt in his own voice. "For now, probably yes. But I wanted you to know what's going on so you can stay alert. It's possible Caldwell might hire someone outside his usual circle to come after Gwendolyn, someone the authorities don't know about. That's why I am here in person rather than just sending a telegram. I wanted to make sure you understand the seriousness of the situation." Zachary felt Gwendolyn slip her hand into his, her fingers trembling slightly. He squeezed gently, offering what comfort he could. "What do you suggest we do?" He asked Carl. "Be careful. Keep your eyes open for strangers or anyone asking questions. I will keep making inquiries, stay on top of what is happening with the case in Missouri. And if anyone does show up here making threats, you send word to me immediately. Better yet, you shoot first and send word second. Colorado law allows you to defend your property and your wife from threats. I can do that, Zachary said grimly. Carl stayed for coffee and conversation, going over safety protocols and discussing the layout of the ranch, the best places to keep watch for approaching riders. By the time he left, full dark had fallen, and Zachary found himself checking and rechecking the locks on the doors and windows, something he had never bothered with before. That night, Gwendolyn clung to him in bed, her body tense despite his attempts to soothe her. "I am so sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "I have brought nothing but trouble into your life." "Stop that," he said firmly, pulling her closer. "You have brought joy and love and purpose into my life. Whatever trouble comes with it, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means." "But what if something happens to you because of me? What if Caldwell sends someone dangerous, someone who does not care about the law? Then I will deal with them," Zachary said simply. "Gwendolyn, I was a soldier. I have faced danger before. I am not afraid of some city thug who thinks he can come out here and intimidate us." "I am afraid," she admitted. "Not for myself so much anymore, but for you, for Thomas, for the life we are building. I could not bear to lose it now that I have finally found happiness." He kissed her then, long and deep, trying to pour all his love and reassurance into the gesture. "You won't lose it. You won't lose me. I promise you that." They made love with a desperate intensity that night, clinging to each other as though they could hold back the approaching storm through sheer force of will. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together as always, Zachary kept one arm around his wife and one hand on the pistol he had placed under his pillow. The next several days passed in tense watchfulness. Zachary made sure to keep his rifle within reach at all times, and he asked Thomas to be extra vigilant, to report any signs of strangers in the area. He also rode the property more frequently, checking the boundaries, looking for tracks or any indication that someone had been scouting the ranch. But days turned into a week, and the week turned into 2, and nothing happened. No strangers appeared, no threats materialized. Gradually, the tension began to ease. Gwendolyn started sleeping through the night again without nightmares. Zachary found himself relaxing his constant vigilance, allowing himself to believe that maybe they really were safe, that Caldwell's reach didn't extend as far as the Colorado mountains. Then, on a bright morning in late April, everything changed. Zachary was out checking the cattle in the far pasture when he heard the sound of gunfire coming from the direction of the ranch house. His blood turned to ice, and he kicked his horse into a gallop, racing back toward home with his heart in his throat. As he crested the hill that overlooked the ranch, he saw smoke rising from near the barn. 3 men on horseback were circling the house, and he could hear more gunfire, this time from inside the building. Gwendolyn was shooting back, he realized with a fierce surge of pride and terror. Thomas appeared from the barn, rifle in hand, and managed to get off 2 shots before one of the riders wheeled around and fired at him. The young man went down, and Zachary felt rage unlike anything he had ever known rise up in his chest. He charged down the hill, his own rifle already in his hands, and opened fire on the riders. His first shot took one man clean out of the saddle. His second hit another man's horse, sending it bucking and throwing its rider to the ground. The third rider, seeing his companions down and this new threat bearing down on him, made the mistake of trying to flee. Zachary pursued him, caught up to him before he could reach the road, and dragged him from his horse. They fought hand to hand in the dirt, and Zachary had the advantage of fury and fighting experience on his side. He had the man pinned within minutes, his forearm pressed against the stranger's throat, applying just enough pressure to cut off air. "Who sent you?" Zachary demanded. The man struggled, gasping for air, his face turning red. "Caldwell," he finally choked out. "Vernon Caldwell. Said to bring the woman back or make sure she never talked." "Well, you failed," Zachary said coldly. He increased the pressure slightly, watching the man's eyes go wide with fear. "And you are going to tell that to the sheriff. And then you are going to testify against Caldwell in exchange for leniency. Understand?" The man nodded frantically, and Zachary released him, hauling him to his feet and shoving him toward the house. The other two riders were down, one dead from Zachary's shot, the other unconscious from being thrown from his horse. Zachary's first concern was for Gwendolyn. He burst through the front door to find her standing by the window, his spare rifle in her hands, her face pale but determined. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crossing the room in 3 long strides to pull her into his arms. "No," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "They did not get inside. I heard them coming and barred the door, but Thomas, he went out to confront them and I saw him go down." "I'll check on him," Zachary promised. "Stay here, keep the door barred." He found Thomas near the barn, clutching his shoulder where blood seeped through his fingers. But the young man was alive and conscious, grinning up at Zachary despite the obvious pain. "Got one of them," Thomas said proudly. "Before they got me, I mean. Did you see?" "I saw," Zachary confirmed, relief flooding through him. "You did good, kid, real good. But next time maybe take cover first before you start shooting." "Yes, sir, I will remember that." The shoulder wound was clean, the bullet having passed through without hitting bone or major blood vessels. Zachary bandaged it as best he could, then helped Thomas into the house where Gwendolyn immediately took over his care, her seamstress's steady hands far better suited to the delicate work of cleaning and dressing the wound. Zachary rode into Georgetown to fetch Sheriff Carl Mitchell, bringing the surviving attackers with him, the conscious one tied to his horse, the unconscious one slung over his saddle. The dead man he left at the ranch, covered with a tarp, to be dealt with later. Carl took one look at the prisoners and set his jaw in a hard line. "Tell me everything." Zachary did, leaving out no details, and Carl listened with growing anger. "This ends now," the sheriff declared. "I am going to send a telegram to the federal marshal in St. Louis. Let them know what happened here. These men attempted murder and kidnapping on Colorado soil. Even if Caldwell beats his fraud charges, he'll go down for this. And in the meantime, I am going to make sure Georgetown has a deputy stationed near your ranch, at least until we get word that Caldwell is behind bars for good." "I appreciate that, Carl. It's the least I can do. You are a good man, Zach, and your wife does not deserve to live in fear." "No woman does." The conscious prisoner, faced with the reality of his situation and the threat of the hangman's noose, agreed to testify against Vernon Caldwell in exchange for a reduced sentence. The unconscious one came around eventually and, presented with the same choice, made the same decision. True to his word, Carl assigned a young deputy named James Preston to stay in a tent near the Jennings ranch, keeping watch for any further threats. And he sent detailed telegrams to the authorities in Missouri, laying out everything that had happened. The response came within a week. Vernon Caldwell, facing new charges of conspiracy to commit murder and kidnapping in addition to his existing fraud charges, had been denied bail and remanded to custody pending trial. Several more of his associates had been arrested, and the federal authorities expressed their gratitude for the information and cooperation provided by the citizens of Georgetown, Colorado. When Carl brought the news out to the ranch, Gwendolyn wept with relief, and Zachary held her close, feeling like a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "It's really over?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "It's really over," Carl confirmed. "Caldwell is going to spend the rest of his life in prison, assuming he does not hang. And even if he somehow gets out eventually, he will be an old man with no power and no resources. He will not be coming after you, Gwendolyn. That chapter of your life is closed." Over the following weeks, life gradually returned to normal. Thomas's shoulder healed cleanly, though he would carry a scar from the bullet for the rest of his life, which he displayed with considerable pride whenever anyone asked about it. Deputy Preston remained camped near the ranch for another month, just to be safe, but no further threats materialized. Gwendolyn threw herself into establishing her sewing business, transforming the spare room into a bright, well-organized workspace. Word spread quickly through Georgetown and the surrounding mining camps that there was a talented seamstress taking commissions, and within weeks, she had more work than she could handle. She hired 2 young women from town to help her with the simpler tasks, teaching them the trade while she focused on the more complex pieces. Zachary watched with pride as his wife blossomed, her natural talents and business acumen combining to create something successful and fulfilling. The money she earned, she insisted on putting back into the ranch, helping to purchase more cattle and better equipment. "We are partners," she told him firmly when he protested. "What I earn is ours, just as what you earn is ours. We build this together." That summer was one of the best of Zachary's life. The ranch prospered, the cattle multiplied, and the love between him and Gwendolyn deepened with each passing day. They worked together, planned together, dreamed together about the future they were building in this wild and beautiful place. In August, Gwendolyn discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary over breakfast one morning, her face glowing with joy and just a touch of nervousness. "A baby," he repeated, the words not quite seeming real. "We're going to have a baby. We are," she confirmed. "In February, if I am calculating correctly." "Are you happy?" "Happy." He stood up, came around the table, and lifted her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to stop. "Gwendolyn, I am more than happy. I am delighted. I am overjoyed. I love you so much, and I cannot wait to meet this child we have made together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Gwendolyn continued her sewing work through the fall, only slowing down when her growing belly made it difficult to reach the sewing table comfortably. Zachary fussed over her constantly, making sure she rested enough, ate enough, stayed warm enough as winter settled over the valley once again. Thomas, who had become like a younger brother to both of them, was equally excited about the coming baby. He started carving a wooden rattle, then a set of blocks, then an elaborate cradle that he worked on for weeks until it was perfect. "You do not have to do all this," Gwendolyn told him one evening, admiring the cradle that now sat in the corner of the main bedroom. "I want to," Thomas said simply. "You and the boss took me in when I had nothing. You gave me a home, a family. This baby will be like a nephew or niece to me. Of course I want to make things for them." On a cold February night, exactly 1 year after Gwendolyn had first stepped off that stagecoach in Georgetown, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachary feared he might lose both his wife and child. But Gwendolyn was strong, stronger than he had ever given her credit for, and with the help of the midwife from town, she brought their baby boy into the world as the sun rose over the mountains. They named him Henry, after Zachary's father, and Robert, after Gwendolyn's. He was perfect in every way, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Zachary held his son for the first time and felt something shift in his chest. An expansion of love he hadn't known was possible. This tiny, perfect person was his, was theirs, a symbol of everything they had overcome and everything they had built together. "He's beautiful," he whispered, his eyes burning with tears he wasn't ashamed to shed. "He is," Gwendolyn agreed, exhausted but radiant as she lay back against the pillows. "He is ours, and he is perfect, and I love him more than I ever thought possible." The years that followed were full and rich. Henry grew from a baby to a toddler to a young boy, curious and adventurous and deeply loved. Gwendolyn's sewing business continued to thrive, and she eventually opened an actual shop in Georgetown, employing half a dozen women and creating beautiful garments that were sought after throughout Colorado. Zachary's ranch grew too, expanding to over 1,000 acres, the cattle herd numbered in the hundreds. He took on more hands, built a larger bunkhouse, started breeding horses as he had once dreamed. Thomas stayed on, growing from a gangling youth into a capable young man who managed much of the day-to-day operations, freeing Zachary to spend more time with his family. 3 years after Henry's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Emma Grace, who had her father's gray eyes and her mother's gentle spirit. And 2 years after that, another son, James, who was the spitting image of his older brother but with a calmer temperament. The house expanded too, new rooms added as the family grew, until it was no longer the simple 4-room cabin Zachary had built but a proper ranch house, warm and welcoming and full of love and laughter. On a spring evening in 1891, 13 years after Gwendolyn had first arrived in Georgetown, Zachary sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. His children were playing in the yard, their shouts and laughter carrying on the evening air. Through the open door behind him, he could hear Gwendolyn humming as she prepared dinner, the same tuneless melody she always hummed when she was content. Thomas emerged from the barn and came to sit beside him on the porch steps. "Good day?" the younger man asked. "Every day is a good day," Zachary replied and meant it. "Boss, I have been thinking about something," Thomas said, his tone serious. "I have been here 10 years now, and I have saved up a fair amount of money. I was thinking maybe it's time I looked into getting my own place, starting my own herd." Zachary had known this conversation was coming eventually. Thomas was 27 years old now, far too old and capable to be just a hired hand forever. "I think that's a fine idea," he said carefully. "But I hope you know you'll always have a place here if you need it." "I appreciate that, boss, and I am not looking to go far. There is a piece of land about 5 miles north of here, good grazing, reasonable price. I thought maybe I could start small, build it up gradual like you did." "Sounds like you have it all figured out, mostly. There's just one thing." Thomas cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "I was hoping maybe you could teach me how to write a letter to the mail-order bride agencies, like you did." Zachary laughed, a warm sound full of affection. "Looking to follow in my footsteps, are you? Worked out pretty well for you," Thomas pointed out. "You got the best wife in Colorado." "That I did," Zachary agreed. "All right, I will help you write your letter, but fair warning, there is no guarantee you will be as fortunate as I was." "I will take my chances." Inside the house, Gwendolyn called that dinner was ready, and Zachary rose, stretching muscles that were starting to stiffen with age and hard work. He was 39 years old now, no longer the young man who had placed that advertisement all those years ago, but he had never felt richer or more blessed. The family gathered around the table, a ritual they observed every evening no matter how busy the day had been. They held hands while Zachary said grace, thanking the Lord for the food, for their health, for the life they had been given. As they ate and talked, sharing stories about their days, Zachary found his gaze drawn again and again to his wife. She had changed over the years, her face showing the marks of time and childbirth and the hard work of frontier life. But to him, she had never been more beautiful. Later, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, they sat together on the porch as they often did, wrapped in a shared blanket against the mountain chill. "Do you ever regret it?" Zachary asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Answering my advertisement, coming all this way, marrying a stranger." Gwendolyn turned to look at him, and in the moonlight her eyes were soft and full of love. "Not for a single moment. You saved my life, Zachary Jennings, not just from Vernon Caldwell, but from a future of fear and loneliness. You showed me what real love looks like, what partnership and respect and trust mean. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. How could I ever regret that?" "I feel the same way," he said, pulling her closer. "That day you stepped off the stagecoach, so afraid and uncertain, I had no idea how much you would change my life. You made this house a home. You made me understand what it means to love someone completely. Everything good in my life started the day you arrived." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 13 years of love and trust and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. Henry grew tall and strong, taking naturally to ranch work and eventually becoming his father's right-hand man. Emma developed her mother's talent for sewing and design, apprenticing in Gwendolyn's shop and eventually taking it over when her mother decided to retire. James, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a passion for books and learning, eventually becoming a teacher in Georgetown. Thomas did indeed purchase his own land, and with Zachary's help, started his own small ranch. He also followed through on his plan to contact a mail-order bride agency, and 2 years later married a sweet-natured woman from Indiana named Sarah. The two couples remained close friends, often gathering for Sunday dinners and holidays. Zachary and Gwendolyn grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving more slowly but their love never diminishing. They became grandparents several times over, their house once again filled with the sounds of children playing, albeit grandchildren this time. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town of Georgetown threw them a celebration. It seemed like everyone they had ever known turned out to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. There were speeches and toasts, reminiscences and laughter. Sheriff Carl Mitchell, now retired but still sharp as ever, stood up to speak. "I remember the day Zach came to me, worried about his new bride who had arrived with fear in her voice. I remember how gentle he was with her, how patient, how determined to help her feel safe. And I remember thinking that if more men treated women with that kind of respect and tenderness, the world would be a much better place. Zach and Gwendolyn, you have shown this community what real love looks like. You have raised fine children, built successful businesses, and contributed more to Georgetown than you probably even realize. It is an honor to call you friends." That night, lying in bed in the house they had shared for a quarter century, Gwendolyn traced the lines of Zachary's face with gentle fingers. 25 years, she mused. It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all. "I know what you mean," he replied. "Sometimes I still see you as that frightened young woman stepping off the stagecoach. Other times, it feels like we have been together forever, like I can barely remember life before you." "Do you think we have done well?" she asked. "With our life, our children, everything we have built?" "I think we have done better than well," Zachary said firmly. "I think we have created something beautiful and lasting. I think we have shown our children what love and partnership look like. I think we have made a difference in this community. And most importantly, I think we have been happy. Not every moment, not every day, but overall, throughout the years, we have been genuinely, deeply happy. How many people can say that? Not many, she agreed. We are very blessed. We are, he confirmed, pulling her close. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment, every challenge, every joy. You are the best decision I ever made, Gwendolyn Jennings. She kissed him, and even after 25 years, he still felt that spark, that connection that had been forged in gentleness and patience and had grown into something unbreakable. More years passed. Zachary's hair turned completely white, and his joints ached on cold mornings, but he still rose before dawn to check on his cattle, still worked alongside his sons and grandsons to keep the ranch running. Gwendolyn moved more slowly too, her hands sometimes stiff from decades of sewing, but she still pieced quilts, still helped Emma with difficult orders, still filled her home with beauty. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family and friends. By this time, Georgetown had grown from a rough mining town into a more settled community, with paved streets and a railroad connection and all the modern conveniences of the new century. But the Jennings Ranch remained much as it had always been, a place of hard work and simple pleasures, of family gatherings and good food, of love that had been tested by time and trouble and had emerged stronger for it. On a golden autumn evening in 1918, Zachary sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. He was 66 years old now, his body marked by decades of ranch work and the passage of time, but his mind was still sharp, his heart still full. Gwendolyn emerged from the house with 2 cups of coffee and settled into the chair beside him with a contented sigh. They sat in comfortable silence, as they had so many thousands of times before, watching the light fade from the sky. "I have been thinking," Gwendolyn said eventually, "about that day I arrived in Georgetown all those years ago. How terrified I was, how uncertain about the future." "I remember," Zachary said softly. "You were shaking so hard you could barely stand. And you were so gentle," she continued. "So patient. You could have demanded your rights as my husband-to-be. You could have forced me into a marriage I was not ready for. But instead, you spoke gently until I found trust. You gave me time and space to heal. You showed me what real love looks like. You made it easy," he replied. "From that very first day, even through all the fear, I could see your strength. I could see the woman you would become once you felt safe enough to let yourself shine. We have had a good life," she said, reaching over to take his hand. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was that frightened girl on the stagecoach. You gave me everything, Zachary. A home, a family, a purpose, love beyond measure. I could never thank you enough for all of it." "You have thanked me every day," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "By being who you are, by building this life with me, by loving me as completely as I love you. We have been partners in the truest sense of the word, and I would not change a single moment of our time together." They sat together as the stars began to appear overhead. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had overcome fear and danger and uncertainty to build something beautiful and lasting. Their children and grandchildren were scattered throughout Colorado now, carrying forward the values and love that Zachary and Gwendolyn had modeled for them. The ranch would continue for generations, a testament to hard work and perseverance. Gwendolyn's dress shop, now run by Emma and her daughters, remained the finest in Georgetown, creating beautiful garments that women treasured. But more important than any material legacy was the love they had created, the family they had built, the example they had set. As the night deepened around them, Zachary looked at his wife. This woman who had arrived with fear in her voice 40 years ago and who now sat beside him with peace in her eyes and love in her heart. He thought about the journey they had traveled together, the obstacles they had overcome, the joy they had found. "I love you," he said simply, the same words he had spoken countless times over the years, but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," she replied, her voice warm and certain. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, surrounded by the life they had built, secure in the knowledge that whatever time they had left would be spent as they had spent the last 40 years, together in love and grateful for every moment. The stars wheeled overhead, the mountains stood eternal watch, and in a ranch house in the Colorado Valley, two souls who had found each other across distance and circumstance settled in for another peaceful night, still speaking gently, still trusting completely, still loving fully, just as they had from the very beginning.